In 2022, I spent 782 hours studying languages. And the reason why I know that is because I track my study time. But last year was not the first one when I tried to consistently track how much time I spent learning languages. In fact, I had been unsuccessfully trying to measure how much time I spent learning languages for many years, and I would always fail at it. I would buy special notebooks where you can track your study time, and then I would just forget to log my study sessions. Or I would download different tracking apps like a tracker or toggl track, but that also wouldn't work because I would start tracking my time and then I would completely forget that the app is running in the background, and whenever I went back to it I would see something like, "You've been listening to Korean podcasts for the last 72 hours," which was of course not true. So after kind of having given up on trying to track my study time, in 2022 I learned about iOS automations, which is a feature on your iPhone or iPad or even MacBooks, I think, that allows you to run certain applications in the background while you're doing something else. And yeah, I guess the rest is history, and today I wanted to tell you about how I do that, and maybe you'll get inspired to do something similar. Also, I wanted to say that even though I'm going to show you how to set up automations using your iPhone, if you don't have one, I'm pretty sure that Android phones have something very similar. But even if your phone doesn't, there's also external apps for automations like If This Then That, I think, and some other ones that I'll leave somewhere here on the screen so you can check those out. What does it mean to automate your time tracking? That basically means that every time I open an app that has to do with language learning, let's say Duolingo, my phone will automatically let toggl track, which is the app that I use for time tracking, start tracking time towards one of my languages. So what is toggl track? Toggl track is an app that lets you track the time you spend on different activities. What you do here is you create different projects. I like for my stats to be a little more detailed, so instead of assigning a project to a language, what I do is for each of my languages I have multiple projects. Like, let's say I have Italian active listening, or I have active study for Italian, or reading, and same goes for pretty much any other language I study. What you also have is descriptions. And descriptions basically give you a little bit more insight into what exactly it is that you're doing. So for example, here I have a project called active studying for Italian, and then you can see that a description here for this activity is Duolingo. So that means that I know that I was actively studying like vocabulary or grammar, but I also know that I did it in Duolingo, right? So how you set up toggl track or any other app that you use depends on you and your own preferences. The reason why I'm showing you this is that you kind of have to have an idea, and you have to have all those projects set up before you set up automations for time tracking. Now finally, let's go to this app that is called Shortcuts. So I go there, and then what we need is not shortcuts but automations. You can see that I already have a lot of automations, but let's start with the simplest ones. So what we do is we create a new automation, we choose a personal automation, and then we scroll all the way down to choose app. So this basically means that we are creating an automation that will run when a certain app, we're going to choose the app in a second, is either opened or closed. Let's say the app is going to be Cake. I think Cake, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't used it in a while, is an app that allows you to either learn Korean or English. So we are going to choose Cake, and then we have to choose whether the automation will run when the app is opened or when the app is closed. For what we need right now, we are going to choose when Cake is opened. And then here we have to choose the action that's actually going to be performed when the app is open. So what we do is we press Add Action, then we go to apps, and then we find the app that we use for tracking time. In my case, it's toggl track. And then you will have different options, and what we need is to start time entry. So we need toggl track to start tracking time that we spend learning a certain language. And then you have two placeholders, one for description and one for project. Normally something like this would go to an active studying project for Korean, but I don't think I have one created, so I'm just going to choose Korean reading for the purpose of this video. And then in the description, I'm just gonna say that it's cake, so that next time I look at my statistics, I can see that I spent this much time reading, but out of the time that I spent reading, I can also see how much time I spent in cake. You can also add some extra information, for example, task. I think tasks are only available if you're paying for toggl track, so I'm not touching that. For tags are actually useful, so I'm going to choose Korean and I'm going to choose reading. So that I can later track my reading, let's say, across all of the languages that I study. And now we get to see like a preview of our automation. So basically, when cake is opened, toggl track will start time entry, and then you have this toggle here. It depends on whether you want your phone to ask you before running the automation or if you don't. In my case, I want the automation to run automatically, so I don't want my phone to bother me every time I open the app. So I just say do not ask and do not notify when the automation starts. So we just created an automation, but that's unfortunately not all, because what this means is that every time we open cake, our phone will start tracking that time for us. But what we also need is for toggl track or whatever app you're using to stop tracking once you close the app, and that's another automation that we are going to have to create. So what we do is we create a new personal automation. We go to app again, but now instead of choosing is opened, we're choosing is closed. Then we need the same app, which is cake. And then we go and we add an action. This one is going to be a little easier because what we need is toggl track. And then here, toggl track doesn't really let you choose which time entry you're going to stop, but it only, I think, lets you track one thing at a time, so it doesn't really matter. So what I do is I just choose stop, and that basically means that your phone will stop the time entry that is running right now. And then again, do you want to be asked before running or do you not want to be asked? I do not want to be asked, and that's it, right? We created two automations, one for when cake is opened, we will start a time entry, and then when cake is closed, we stop our time tracking. That is our basic automation. We are going to do something a little bit more complicated later on, but I just wanted to tell you that there are certain apps that you might use for your language learning where you do not need to create an automation for when the app is closed. For example, I listen to podcasts a lot in the languages that I study. And what happens is that when you are listening to a podcast, you probably don't have the podcast app open all the time. Sometimes you need to open something like your dictionary to look up a word that you just heard. Sometimes you're maybe doing something else using some other app or something like that, right? So for those apps that run in the background, what I do is I just do not create an automation for when the app is closed. But that also means that because time tracking will start when you open the app, but it will not stop when you close the app since you're still listening to something in the background. That also means that you will have to remember to go back and stop time tracking once you're done listening to your podcast. Okay, now let's move on to a more complicated type of automations that will be a little bit more difficult to set up, but once you set them up, I promise it will save you so much time. So what I showed you before was assigning one language to a certain app. For me, let's say Cake is an app where I learn Korean, right? But what about apps like Duolingo or Closemaster or Speakly or so many other different apps that we can use to study different languages? I have a solution for that, and even though it looks intimidating at first, it's not really difficult to set up. So basically, what we are going to do now is we're going to have our phone ask us every time we open a certain app which language exactly we are studying, and I'm going to show you how that works. So here's Closemaster. I opened it, and you see I get a list of languages to choose from, and I have Italian, Japanese, Greek, Polish, Spanish, and Korean. And depending on which one I choose, my phone will start tracking time for the language that I choose from this menu. How do you do that? We go back to shortcuts, automations, and then we create a new personal automation again. Then we go back to apps again, and then we choose our app. Let's say we choose Duolingo. So what will our phone do every time we open Duolingo? What we want, as I said, is we want our phone to ask us which language we are studying right now. And for that, we are adding an action. Then we go to scripting, and then here you will see choose from menu. So we're going to create a menu that you have just seen when I opened Close Master. So first we need a prompt, and this is the question that your phone's gonna ask you. Language, question mark, that's it. My first option is Italian. My second option is, let's say, Greek. And then my third option that I can study on Duolingo is, let's say, Korean. Okay, so these are just the names of the options. Now we have to assign certain actions for them. So what we have here now is we have Italian, Greek, and Korean. And then we do basically the same thing that we just did with our first automation. We go into apps, and then we go to toggle track. We choose start time entry, but you will see that it falls under this, so we need to drag it. If we want this to start for Italian, if we want to track Italian, then we need to drag it under Italian. And then for Italian, I will choose active study, and the description will be Duolingo. And then I will also assign a tag, which is Italian, so that I can compare the stats for all of my languages later. Now we need another one. What we can do is we can either duplicate this one, or we can create a new action. I'm lazy, so I just duplicate the same one, but instead of Italian active study, I'm gonna choose Greek active study, and I should not forget to change the tag, because the tag for this is not Italian, it's Greek. And then I duplicate it again, and I drag it under Korean. And I choose Korean active study. I don't think I have active study for Korean. I have active learning for some reason. Okay, that just shows you how much I neglect my Korean. And again, instead of Greek, I put the Korean tag. So yeah, that's basically what we have. And what we can do is we can press this play button to get a preview of our automation. And you see, so here we have language, question mark, Italian, Greek, or Korean. One thing I wanted to add is that sometimes there are certain apps that you can use for both language learning, but also just for fun, for doing things in your native language, right? For example, YouTube. Sometimes I watch videos in my target languages, but I also watch videos in English that I do not track, or Russian, that is my native language. So what you do for that is you either just click away whenever you see the menu, then your phone will not track the time you are spending on the app. Or another thing that you can do is that you can just also add another option. I just call it do not track, right? Your phone doesn't understand what you call it, so you just call it whatever you want, whatever you will be able to later understand. And for do not track, you see we get this thing again here, but we're not going to assign any action. So for do not track, we do not need any action. And when we run the preview of our automation, we see do not track. If we press it, nothing happens. Your phone will not track anything. We click next, then we see the summary of your automation. And again, I do not want my phone to ask me before running, and so it's done. Now, when I open Duolingo, let's do that actually, you will see that my phone is asking me which language I am currently learning. Also, something that I wanted to tell you is that even though I mostly use app-related automations, which means that they start running when a certain app is open, another thing that was useful for me when I had Japanese classes every Monday and Friday, I think, at a certain time, was just setting time-bound automations. And the way you do it is you basically create an automation, but then instead of going all the way down to choose app, what you do is you choose time of day, and then you pick a certain time. Let's say my classes would start at 7 a.m. Then you pick weekly, let's say if you have a class every week. And then for me, it was Mondays and Fridays. So I choose that. And then basically we create an automation the same way we would when we were creating app-related automations. So I start tracking, let's say I start tracking Japanese active study. And then here I would put something like classes. Next, do not ask before running, or maybe ask before running. Maybe you're skipping a class this week, so maybe you want to be asked whether the automation should run or not. And then just like we created two automations for when an app is opened or when an app is closed. The same way we have to create one to start tracking when your class starts for the time that your class starts, and then the other one to stop tracking for the time when your class ends. So I hope this gave you some insight into how you can use your phone to automate your study time. At the same time, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention that have to do with time tracking, because I've heard some people say that they feel like it's not really healthy for them, like they get obsessed with numbers, and I do understand how this might be a thing, and I think you should always just respect your feelings first. So if you feel like that would be something that would put a lot of pressure on you, then do not track your study time. In my case, I don't really feel pressured to study more when I look at my numbers, and also, to be completely honest with you, so much of my study time gets tracked automatically without my participation that I sometimes just don't think about it. I completely forget about it, and then whenever I finish like a language related project or something similar, then I can go back and kind of see what I was doing, and even then sometimes the results are more encouraging than depressing. Because let's say with my 100 days of Polish challenge, I actually wanted to study Polish for 100 days, but I stopped studying completely somewhere at around day 85. But then I went back and I looked at my study hours, and I realized that I reached 96 hours in studying Polish, which is great. So, you know, I would have probably been a little more depressed about the results of the challenge had I not had the statistics to look at. But then again, you know yourself better than anyone else, and if you think that it's not really great for your study process or your mental health, then just don't do it. Don't worry about it. But if time tracking is something you're interested in, I hope this video was helpful to you, and if you have any questions left, just leave them down below and I'll be happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye!